Welcome to the Revenue Rewired podcast, hosted by StringCan Interactive's visionary CEO, Jay Feitlinger, and no-nonsense COO, Sarah Shepard. We're here to accelerate your revenue and give your marketing purpose. All right, hello, and welcome to this next and special episode of the Revenue Rewired podcast. It is our amazing Chief Wellbeing Officer, Jane Cebrynski. Hello, Jane.
Hello, Sarah.
And my fellow yoga teacher as well. You have so many hidden talents.
Oh my gosh.
Well, we love talking to Jane, and I think well-being in general is an interesting topic, but we really wanted to talk about burned out leaders and how misaligned teams and broken revenue all are part of that process. And I think it deserves a little bit of a special conversation, and I couldn't think of anyone better than Jane to have that conversation with. So let me intro Jane to you all. Um, you know, when I was talking with her about misalignment and the person leading a misaligned team, we thought about leaders. And, then the word burnout came up, and Jane is not a bubble baths and burnout kind of gal. She's here to talk about internal states as leaders. It's either fueling execution or it's fracturing it. Jane is a certified sports life coach and chief well-being officer who trains high-performing CEOs, CROs, and founders to lead like elite athletes, grounded, resilient, and brutally clear. And I could say that with confidence because I've known Jane for years. She's actually been my business coach and served as StringCan's well-being officer. And most importantly, you're my friend. And I've seen firsthand how Jane's work changes leaders and companies. We've experienced that for ourselves. She's also the founder of Empower for Growth, where she coaches leaders through high stakes personal and professional transitions using tools like breathwork, mindset training, and performance rituals that actually drive results. And Jane, while a lovely and kind human being, doesn't believe in soft leadership. She believes in self-regulated, systems-ready, revenue-aligned leadership. Because if the leader isn't clear, the team won't be either. Right, Jane?
True that. Yeah, true that.
All right. Well, I think, the first thing we want to talk about, because while I don't know that the definition is really arguable, but I know it is very personal, it's the burnout bottleneck. And I think it's a reality because, in a way, some leaders might think of it as failure, but frankly, they're scattered, they're flooded. They think the answer is another playbook, another person. It's like, for some reason, they think addition will equal subtraction. Um, and, I think that internal misalignment is very costly. And so I'd love to know what your take is on that. And, what does it actually cost a business?
Yeah, I think that's such a great question, Sarah. And oftentimes I find that the way we operate or the way we think we're supposed to operate is so counterintuitive to what actually gets us the performance and the profits. And if a leader is burnout and they're not maybe recognizing the signs of it or they're not willing to acknowledge it, believe me, that energy gets felt and teams see it, feel it, and experience it. And if we think about, what burnout is, I mean, we're energy beings. We are energy. We run at 98 degrees if we're running the way we're supposed to. We burn calories. Food is fuel. Like, we are energy beings. And burnout oftentimes is the result of not knowing when to pull back and moving at a level that ultimately ends up being unsustainable. It's kind of like, running your car into the ground and never taking care of it and thinking that it can just keep going, going, going. Oftentimes we talk about it from the perspective of it's not about, it's not about the intensity of the energy, focus, and engagement. It's about the duration and how are we treating this system we call the body.
Yeah, it sounds like the cost to a business isn't just the leader, right? It's cascading and maybe an icky word, but I think true is like infecting the rest of the team.
Yeah.
with like burnout. I think it's a little bit of a mindset, but it actually is a physical reality. And you've had to coach a lot of leaders through some really challenging situations, like major moments. I brought you on to coach me when my dad passed. And I know you've
Yeah.
got a special platform for divorce, for job
Mhm.
shifts, team turnover. How do you see, especially high performers, that's who you
Yeah.
coach, how do you
Yeah.
see them respond to stress?
Yeah, I think there's two schools, right? It depends on your level of awareness again and your understanding about what's happening in the body. So, stress happens in the body. I mean, cortisol gets elevated. We're in the sympathetic part of the nervous system, which is that fight or flight mechanism. And while we need cortisol, we too much of it can really impact not only our immune system, but our ability to make clear decisions, our ability to really be present, and function. And so shifting into that parasympathetic part of the nervous system, the part that says, okay, I'm through this, I'm regulated. How am I, regulating my emotions? And I think if we understand how we operate, if we understand our capacity, if we understand the way our body responds and reacts, right? Then it's about developing tools and strategies to help move through it. I find that a lot of high performers think they can push through. That's our natural tendency, right? Like I got this, I can do this, I can do this. Or everyone's depending on me to push through. And I think an element of emotional intelligence, which is a soft skill from a leadership perspective, from an emotional intelligence perspective, it's about recognizing when do I need to pull back? I think about it in terms of sports, right? There are so many athletes that have had career ending injuries because they pushed through the injury and were not willing to like step back, take a moment to rehab. It's kind of like, I can keep doing this. I can keep pushing through. And then ultimately they do more damage than if they would have just taken a break to begin with. And I get it that there's this balance between like, okay, I know I don't feel great. I can get up and push through today versus, okay, if I push through today, I'm going to be set back for 5 days. So I'm just going to take that break now and rest. And rest and recovery is not something a lot of, I think we're talking about it a lot more, but it was treated very counterintuitively before. And I think about rest as restoration. The body needs time to rest. It needs time to recover. I mean, this is our operating system, and it would be like, again, running your car to the ground without checking the battery, changing the tires, putting the fuel in, changing the oil, all the things that we take care of really well. And it's an amazing machine, this body that we have, but it needs tending to. You're giggling. What's showing up for you
Well,
when
I'm
you
thinking about
see that?
how like rest and recovery to so many people feels like synonymous with the word luxury
Yeah.
versus
We're
necessity.
lazy,
Yeah,
right?
yeah. Uh-huh. Which, I've actually started when I got back from Spain, I missed walking a lot. And so one of the things I've been doing is making myself leave my stinking desk every day at lunch. And the last 2 days have been absolutely horrendous. Like
Yeah.
110 is a lot.
Yeah.
But
Right.
I need it because then all of a sudden things that I've been just staring at kind of bubble to the top. And I want to prevent burnout because, to your point about high performers, it's part of the high performance feedback loop, I guess, is rest and recovery. And what I'd love to hear from you is in the terms of clients that you've had and people that you've coached, have
Yeah.
you seen bottleneck impact revenue through burnout? Like a leader maybe was creating unnecessary challenges. They didn't recognize that they weren't optimally performing.
Yeah.
Um, anything like that showing up for you.
Yeah, well, I'm not necessarily in everybody's, P&Ls, so can't say for sure what's happening to their revenue, but here's what we do know. We know that if it's an element of, if it's control, right, that already becomes a performance barrier because I might not be depending on my team. I might not be utilizing the strengths of my team. And I see that a lot. And I hear leaders saying, I need to do it. And I get the visual, and you and I've had this conversation. I get the visual of like, I'm taking the ball as the leader and I'm playing versus I'm giving the ball to my team to go and play, which means we have to let go of some control, perhaps. We might have to let go of our idea of how it should be done. We might need to let them go out and play and make mistakes and perhaps do it differently than we would. But then, how else does the team gain confidence, develop skill? And it's interesting. I've just been working with a couple of leaders right now where this just came up. In fact, they're burning out, they feel obligated, they're trying to transition away from being the one carrying the ball, and they recognize themselves as the bottleneck. Like, I mean, that takes awareness first and foremost to recognize like I'm kind of the one that is getting in the way. And how do I start to let go of control? And how do I then train my team up in such a way that allows me to let go? And, great leaders know how to delegate. They know how to leverage their support team and see it as a team effort. They don't have to do all the heavy lifting all of the time. But that is a mindset shift sometimes. And it
Yeah, and
takes
you're
burning out
absolutely
sometimes
right.
to get there.
Well, and that's why coaches like you can help identify those kind of like blind spots, I guess, that someone might have. And, what you're talking about, Rob, Nicoletti and I talked about this in our podcast where the 6 R's, and one of them was retention, or recruitment, I should say, like, basically HR. But what you're talking about is really detrimental to your team when you yourself aren't letting them do their jobs. It doesn't make anyone feel good, right?
Right.
And so I think that self-awareness piece is really critical, which ties into our second point, which peak performance being an inside job. I
Yeah.
do love your sports conversations because it makes so much sense to me about like the coach aspect, and the coach is not out there holding the ball. They're coaching the team. And it really
Right.
helped me think about growing in my leadership skills. And so you train leaders like athletes with rituals and mindset drills and breath work. And, why would you say that that approach works so well in an executive environment?
Because let's just look at all the athletes that use these strategies, and we know how effective it is. I mean, it's my gosh, we watch them. Like I remember very specifically, the Olympics comes to mind, where watching the athletes take a breath before they jumped on the apparatus and giving themselves a self pep talk. Like we're no different. We just play a different sport, and it's about, how do I recognize within myself what I need so that I can go out and perform as a leader or perform in whatever role I'm responsible for. And I find with entrepreneurs that I've worked with, when you're starting from the ground up and you are everything, you maybe are the accountant, the sales rep, the BD, the human resource, like you're everything. And sometimes we get our identity around being that person and that I'm needed in all of those roles. So, how do I start to change my beliefs around that, but then start letting that go? And that's all change. And change can be uncomfortable, change can be different. And if I'm having to let go of aspects of that so that my team can grow, so that other people can play, it's really powerful. And also remembering, I always think about the oxygen mask analogy. Maybe it gets overused. I'm not sure, but it's really true when you go on an airplane and they tell the parent, put your oxygen mask on first. I was literally that parent. I will never forget it when I'm like, why? Why? Like, I would put it on my kids first. And she's like, well, if you're passed out, how well are you going to do for your kids? And being the leader, whether it's of a team or an organization, if you're not taking care of yourself, then what good are you going to be to the team if you're not available, if you're not around to lead the team?
Yeah, and isn't too, a lot of entrepreneurs like they're motivated by freedom, and one of those aspects is being able to step away from your business. And what ends up
Right.
happening is the complete opposite, where they just
Yes.
become more and more sucked into the business by feeling like they have to do it all, which
Yep.
it again also affects revenue. I think because if you are frankly the bottleneck or
Yep.
the burned out BD rep or the ideator visionary, it doesn't last forever at that pace. You really
Yes.
have to focus to your point. Like, I love the Olympics so much. You and I nerd out so hard on that, but they can't get to the next Olympics in 4 years by just grinding it out and sprinting all day, every day.
Right.
They have injuries and they have to deal with making sure they rest and recover. And even some of them
Yes.
have children in between,
Yeah.
and so I don't, um, I don't know why more people don't think about leadership in terms like that, where this really is a long game, especially if you're an entrepreneur and you want to grow your business, or someone who's striving to be the best at their director, VP, C-suite role. I would
Yeah.
really want to focus on that. Have there been any client cases where you really saw a huge shift in, maybe not their business if you were coaching them individually, but maybe a team you coached, that you saw a shift once you got involved by helping them understand the importance of some of these rituals and health and peak performance, how it might have brought them a little bit closer together in terms of cohesiveness or culture?
Well, if you think about the formula 1 + 1 = 3, I don't know if you've heard about that, but what when we're igniting the power of team, when 1 + 1 = 3 means that we become greater than the sum of our parts when we come together. So if we are coming together as a team, we are supporting the mission of the company. We're in alignment. We're supporting one another. We're able to give each other real time feedback. I mean, again, I go back to sports. Like, athletes are getting real time feedback constantly, where we do it, what, once a year? Or if we get it, we see it as criticism versus like being for me and for the team and me getting better and performing better, fixed mindset versus a growth mindset. So when we, shift the way we're thinking about it and maybe step away from being afraid that somebody might see a flaw in me, afraid that if I make a mistake, I'm going to be fired and that's failure. If we can see that when we get better together, and that elevates the team, and we can work more efficiently, we can work faster. I mean, the things that people complain about the most and get frustrated about, with respect to communication, and yet we don't practice having hard conversations. We don't practice as much. And I'm saying I know it's not general. There's companies out there that do practice this. And this is the opportunity. This is the opportunity to like really change the way we think about it. If we want to think in terms of a high performance, we've got to get really good at communicating and communicating quickly and communicating, fast. Again, sports, I look at, they call plays, they're succinct, they're short, they're quick. Well, if I don't give you a big, long explanation around why this thing isn't due yet, You might be more forgiving instead of me simply owning, like, here's my performance barrier, here's why I didn't get it done, and here's what I'm doing to fix it. But instead, we'll write the long email. Again, energy. We'll give a long explanation. Energy. Athletes aren't stopping going, hey, coach, like, why do you need me to do that? They're just like, yeah, let's go. Let's go.
It's making me think about like in, our podcast, Revenue Rewired, we talk about revenue a lot, but this has made me think differently about like my own personal bank and in terms of energy, to your point,
Yes.
that, and I think it's easier, maybe I shouldn't say it like this, but for me, it was easier to appreciate it when I didn't have much to give. I experienced some burnout myself when my dad passed. I oddly was at the peak and then he passed and I just could not get back. I just, Jay was so understanding and patient. And I knew I needed something beyond myself. And it really was reaching out for help and understanding that sometimes you just don't have the skills. Like I did not have the skills necessary to get back to where I needed to be. I felt good about. And that is contagious to your team and they understand. But also seeing their leader go through hard things and not just survive but thrive is also
Yeah.
really important. I think it does help grow healthy cultures. And I don't think that, I mean, it's definitely speeding up, but talking about revenue in terms of healthy cultures, I feel like, man, they're definitely running in parallel with each other. And I know you've
Well,
probably seen that too.
yeah, well, I recall a very specific time, even working with String Can, where this was after you, but one of your teammates faced a loss and you brought me in to work with them. And I think that this is what's really valuable and important. It wasn't about we're not going to ignore the loss, and yet we still have to perform. So, what are the tools and the strategies and the skills that help me move through this in a healthy way that also allows me to be productive? Now, I might not be operating on full cylinders, but because of the work that you guys invested in the team and allowing for that, right, it kept the boat more afloat than not having any tools to be able to operate with. And that's what I think is really powerful. There's been studies, not a lot, but there was once a study done on the cost of divorce to companies. And they said for every $65,000 a year employee going through a divorce, it costs the company $85,000 in revenue. Now, they attributed it to not only the loss of productivity and work hours, the person going through the divorce, they also attributed it to the loss of productivity for all of the people they talked to and their coworkers that they brought into the conversation or the drama or whatever it was, right? So that's just like we know the cost is high. And by the way, um, that does not mean leaders are not immune to that. I've worked with CEOs going through a divorce, and they're just as much of a mess as everybody else, but they feel they've got more at risk and they're trying really hard to stay afloat. And so it's really about honoring, like, okay, we're going through this really emotional and challenging time. How do we get through it? What are the winning strategies? How do we care for ourselves? What opportunities are there for us to engage with the team? Do we need to take a little time off? But in the meantime, what are the other things that we can do to be continuing to move through it? And so I think it's just really, really powerful to recognize, like, if we're not able to show up our best, if we're not showing up fully engaged, we're not bringing that person to the meeting, to the idea, to the work, to the project. And that ultimately can cost the company.
Gosh, that's a frightening statistic. And it's amazing that you do what you do because there just is something about the accountability portion that even as a leader, you have to invest in yourself. And I think if you need permission, Jane and I are here to give you permission to invest in yourself.
Right?
And if you
Yes.
know, if you, a listener, dear listener, or someone you know is running on fumes and feel like there's no time, then we're here for you. And Jane, what is like one piece of advice? I know I'm putting you on the spot and this is such a hard question. I hate this
Oh
question for you.
dear.
But like, what's one thing today someone could do to just feel better about their tomorrow?
Well, the fact that they get it tomorrow, you know, is one possibility, right? Stepping into gratitude. I mean, gratitude for being where we are and in the present moment. I think gratitude is, we talk about it like Kleenex, but really when we sit in gratitude, we have the ability to shift chemicals in the body. We have the ability to really appreciate like where we are, what we do have, and that really shifts the energy as well. And really, shifting from a place of fear perhaps into a place of love. Like, what do I love about my job? And if you struggle to figure that out, or, you know, there's people that can help you. Maybe it's just the love of a paycheck, or the love of a coworker, or the love of a client, or a love of a ping pong table. I don't know. But if we can shift from that space, from fear into a space of love, like what do I love? That has a huge impact on our health and well-being.
I love that. That was the perfect chef's kiss end to this fantastic podcast. Well, thank you so much, Jane, for joining me today. And thank you all so much for listening to the podcast. And we hope you have a great rest of your day.
Thanks for having me, Sarah.
Thanks for tuning in to the Revenue Rewired podcast. Send us your questions to podcast@stringcaninteractive.com and follow us for more insights to drive your business forward.